Walter Johnson was 72 years old, and for most people who knew him, he seemed to be aging remarkably well. He still drove himself to the grocery store, mowed his lawn every Saturday morning, and never missed a chance to spoil his grandchildren with ice cream whenever they visited. Like many seniors, Walter had accepted that getting older came with certain inconveniences. Some days he felt more tired than usual. Sometimes he misplaced his reading glasses and spent 10 minutes searching for them, only to discover they were resting on top of his head. "That's just old age," he would laugh. His wife, Margaret, often teased him about it. "You've said that about everything for the last 10 years. Walter would shrug. Because it's true, at least. That's what he believed. One Tuesday morning, Walter woke up feeling slightly different. He couldn't explain it. Nothing hurt. He wasn't sick. He simply felt unusually exhausted, the kind of exhaustion that seemed to sit deep inside his body. Margaret noticed it immediately. "You look tired. I didn't sleep well, again?" Walter nodded. The truth was that he had been feeling unusually tired for several weeks, but he wasn't concerned. After all, he was 72. Who wouldn't feel tired at 72? He drank his coffee and tried to ignore it. As the morning went on, he found himself struggling to focus on the newspaper. The words seemed blurry for a moment, then normal, then blurry again. He rubbed his eyes. "Need stronger glasses," he muttered. By lunchtime, everything seemed fine again, or so he thought. What Walter didn't realize was that his body had already started sending warning signals. Signals that thousands of seniors dismiss every single day. And those signals often get mistaken for something harmless. Normal aging. Before we continue, take a moment to let us know where you're watching from in the comments. And if you enjoy health stories that could help protect you and your loved ones, make sure to subscribe and like the video. It helps more people learn life-saving information. Over the next several days, Walter experienced more unusual moments. One afternoon, he struggled to remember the name of a longtime neighbor. Not a distant acquaintance, a neighbor he'd known for over 20 years. The name simply disappeared from his mind. He laughed awkwardly, getting old. The next day, he forgot why he had entered the garage. Again, he blamed age. Then came something even stranger. While talking with his daughter on the phone, Walter suddenly struggled to find the right words. For a few seconds, his speech seemed slightly off. Not enough to alarm anyone, just enough to make him pause. His daughter noticed. "Dad, are you okay?" "I'm fine." "You sound tired." "I am tired." The conversation continued normally. Within minutes, Walter had forgotten the entire incident, but his brain had not. Deep inside, something serious was developing. Many people imagine strokes happen suddenly. A dramatic collapse, a person falling to the floor, an ambulance rushing to the hospital. Sometimes that happens, but many strokes begin with subtle warning signs that can appear hours, days, or even weeks beforehand. Signs that look surprisingly similar to common aging problems. That's why they are so dangerous. Walter had no idea. He was walking directly toward one of the most frightening days of his life. A week later, he met his friends at their usual breakfast spot. Every Thursday morning, a group of retired men gathered there to discuss sports, politics, and whatever else crossed their minds. Walter arrived 10 minutes late. His friend Frank immediately noticed something. "Walter, you okay?" "Sure. You seem different." "Different how?" Frank hesitated. "You just seem slower." Walter laughed. "We're all slower." The table erupted in laughter, but Frank wasn't joking. Walter's reaction seemed delayed. His smile looked uneven for a brief moment, then normal again. Nobody thought much of it, not even Walter. After breakfast, he drove home. While backing into his driveway, he briefly struggled to judge the distance between his car and the mailbox. The mailbox appeared farther away than it actually was, then suddenly closer. He blinked. Everything looked normal again. "Need new glasses." That became his explanation for everything. Aging, eyesight, fatigue, stress, anything except the truth. That evening, Margaret asked him to help carry groceries into the house. As Walter lifted one of the bags, something odd happened. His right hand felt weak, not completely useless, just weaker than normal. The sensation lasted less than a minute, then disappeared. Margaret didn't notice. Walter didn't mention it. Another warning sign ignored. Over the next few days, the symptoms became more frequent. The fatigue worsened. The occasional confusion returned. His balance felt slightly off. Walking down the hallway one night, he unexpectedly bumped into a wall. Margaret heard the noise. "Walter, I'm okay. You fell?" "No, what happened?" "Just lost my footing." Again, they blamed age. Because that's what many people do, and that's why so many strokes catch families completely by surprise. One Saturday afternoon, Walter sat outside watching his grandchildren play. The weather was beautiful. The children were laughing. Everything felt normal. Then his granddaughter Emily approached him. "Grandpa?" "Yes." "Why is your smile funny?" Walter looked confused. "My smile?" She nodded. "It looks different." Children often notice things adults overlook. Walter chuckled. "Probably because Grandpa's getting old." Emily accepted the answer and ran back to play. But for several seconds afterward, Walter felt uneasy. Something about her comment bothered him. When he went inside later and looked in the mirror, everything appeared normal. At least, mostly normal. Maybe one side of his face looked slightly different. Or maybe he was imagining things. He couldn't tell, so he stopped thinking about it. Unfortunately, strokes don't stop simply because we stop thinking about them. They continue progressing, sometimes quietly, sometimes aggressively, and often, when people least expect it. The next morning, Walter woke up feeling strangely dizzy. The room wasn't spinning. It was more like his balance system couldn't fully decide where he was. He sat on the edge of the bed, waiting for the sensation to pass. After several minutes, it improved. Margaret asked if he wanted to attend church. Walter almost said no. He felt unusually drained, but he forced himself to go. During the service, he found it difficult to concentrate. The pastor's words seemed harder to follow. His thoughts drifted. Several times he lost track of what was being said. When church ended, Margaret asked if everything was all right. Walter smiled. "I'm just getting older." It was becoming his favorite phrase, a phrase that almost cost him everything. What Walter didn't know was that many seniors mistake stroke symptoms for aging because the changes often happen gradually. Fatigue, forgetfulness, balance problems, vision changes, weakness, confusion, difficulty finding words. These can all seem like ordinary signs of getting older, but sometimes they are something much more serious. And Walter was about to learn that lesson firsthand. The following Tuesday, just after breakfast, he reached for his coffee mug. Suddenly, it slipped from his hand. Coffee spilled across the kitchen table. Margaret jumped. "Walter, I'm fine." But he wasn't fine, because for the first time, fear appeared in his eyes. His hand hadn't simply dropped the mug. For a brief moment, it had felt disconnected, as though it didn't fully belong to him. The sensation vanished quickly, but the fear remained. For the first time, Walter began to wonder if something else was happening, something that couldn't be explained by aging, something much more dangerous. And within the next 24 hours, the answer would become impossible to ignore. Walter tried to convince himself that the coffee mug incident meant nothing. After all, everyone dropped things occasionally. People his age certainly did, but throughout the rest of the day, he couldn't stop thinking about it. The feeling in his hand had been different, strange, unnatural. For a brief moment, it was as if the connection between his brain and his fingers had flickered on and off. That night, Margaret noticed he was unusually quiet. "You haven't said much all evening." "I'm just tired." "Tired again?" Walter nodded. Margaret looked concerned. "You've been saying that for weeks." "I know. Maybe you should see a doctor." Walter forced a smile. "I probably just need more sleep." But deep down, even he no longer believed that explanation. When bedtime arrived, Walter climbed into bed earlier than usual. The exhaustion seemed heavier than ever. Yet despite being tired, he struggled to fall asleep. His mind kept replaying the events of the past several weeks. The fatigue, the forgetfulness, the dizziness, the weakness, the strange speech episodes, the vision problems. For the first time, he connected them together, and the picture frightened him. Around 3 a.m., Walter woke suddenly. Something felt wrong, very wrong. He sat upright. The room was quiet. Margaret was asleep beside him. Walter tried to stand. Immediately, he felt unsteady. His right leg seemed weaker than normal, not completely useless, just different. His heart began to race. He took several careful steps toward the bathroom. Halfway there, he stumbled, catching himself against the wall. A chill ran down his spine. He stood still for several moments, waiting, hoping the sensation would pass. Eventually it did, at least enough for him to return to bed. He considered waking Margaret. Instead, he convinced himself to wait until morning, a decision he would soon regret. When sunrise arrived, Walter felt slightly better. Not normal, but better. He told himself the episode must have been caused by poor sleep, stress, dehydration, anything except what was actually happening. Margaret left to visit her sister that morning. Walter stayed home. He planned to spend a quiet day reading and watching television. For the first hour, everything seemed fine. Then it happened. Walter was sitting in his favorite chair when he noticed a strange numbness creeping into his right arm. At first, it felt like pins and needles, the kind of sensation people experience when a limb falls asleep. He shook his arm. Nothing changed. The numbness slowly spread into his hand. His stomach tightened. Suddenly, he remembered the dropped coffee mug, the weakness, the stumbling, the strange smile Emily had noticed. Fear began to replace denial. Walter stood up. Immediately, he felt dizzy. The room tilted slightly, not enough to make him fall, enough to alarm him. He reached for his phone. As he picked it up, he realized something terrifying. His fingers weren't moving properly. The phone slipped from his grasp and landed on the carpet. Walter bent down to retrieve it. When he stood again, he caught sight of his reflection in a nearby mirror. His breath stopped. One side of his face appeared lower than the other, just slightly, but enough to notice, enough to know something was terribly wrong. His mind raced. He tried to speak aloud. Margaret. The word came out slurred, not completely unintelligible, just wrong, very wrong. For several seconds, Walter stared at his own reflection, the truth finally crashing through weeks of excuses. This wasn't aging. This wasn't fatigue. This wasn't stress. Something serious was happening, and it was happening now. If you've ever dismissed symptoms because you thought they were simply part of getting older, let us know in the comments. Stories like Walter's remind us how important it is to listen to our bodies. And if you're finding this information helpful, please like the video and subscribe so you never miss future health stories that could make a real difference. Walter picked up his phone again. This time he managed to call Margaret. When she answered, she immediately knew something was wrong. Walter? His voice sounded distorted. Margaret. She froze. Walter, what's happening? I don't. His words were difficult to understand. Margaret's heart began pounding. Are you having trouble speaking? There was silence. Then a weak response. Yes. Margaret didn't hesitate. Call emergency services right now. Walter tried to answer. The words wouldn't come. His speech was getting worse. His right arm felt heavier. His right leg felt weaker. For the first time in his life, genuine panic took hold. Fortunately, Margaret stayed calm. She immediately called emergency services herself and explained what was happening. Then she raced back toward the house. Meanwhile, Walter sat frozen in his chair. Every minute felt longer than the last. His thoughts remained clear. That was the frightening part. He knew something terrible was happening, yet he couldn't fully communicate it. Minutes later, the numbness worsened. His arm felt almost useless. His speech became increasingly difficult. He tried forming complete sentences. The words seemed trapped somewhere between his brain and his mouth. It was one of the most helpless feelings he had ever experienced. Outside, sirens finally approached. The sound brought a wave of relief. Paramedics entered the house quickly. One of them knelt beside Walter. Sir, can you smile for me? Walter tried. The result immediately confirmed their concern. The right side of his face drooped noticeably. Can you raise both arms? Walter lifted his left arm. His right arm barely moved. The paramedics exchanged serious looks. They knew exactly what they were seeing: a possible stroke. And in stroke emergencies, every second matters. Because when blood flow to part of the brain is interrupted, brain cells begin dying within minutes. The faster treatment begins, the greater the chance of recovery. The slower the response, the greater the risk of permanent disability. Walter was rushed into the ambulance. As the vehicle sped toward the hospital, he stared at the ceiling. Fear flooded his mind. Would he survive? Would he recover? Would he ever speak normally again? Would he walk again? Questions filled every corner of his thoughts. No answers came. At the hospital, doctors moved quickly. Tests were performed immediately: brain scans, neurological examinations, blood work. The medical team wasted no time. Because stroke treatment is a race against the clock. Hours later, the diagnosis became official. Walter had suffered a stroke. The room fell silent. Even though he had begun to suspect it, hearing the words felt different, more real, more frightening. Margaret squeezed his hand. Tears filled her eyes. The doctor spoke gently. Then came a statement that stunned both of them. Based on Walter's history, the stroke had likely been preceded by warning signs for weeks, possibly longer. The doctor carefully reviewed the symptoms: the unusual fatigue, the temporary weakness, the speech difficulties, the balance problems, the vision changes, the facial asymmetry, the confusion. Each symptom had been a warning. Each one had represented an opportunity to seek medical attention. Walter stared quietly. His mind replayed every moment, every excuse, every time he had blamed aging, every time he had said, "I'm just getting older." Now, those words felt painfully different, because he realized something important. Getting older does not automatically explain every symptom, and assuming it does can be dangerous, very dangerous. The next several days became some of the most challenging of Walter's life. Recovery began immediately. Therapists visited regularly. Doctors monitored his progress closely. Some abilities improved quickly, others required significant effort. Simple tasks suddenly became difficult: buttoning a shirt, holding utensils, writing his name, walking without assistance. Things he had taken for granted now required concentration, patience, determination. But Walter refused to quit. Every day he pushed himself, not because recovery was easy, because it was necessary. And as he worked through therapy sessions, he couldn't stop thinking about one question: what if he had recognized the warning signs earlier? What if he had sought help weeks before the stroke occurred? The answer haunted him, because it might have changed everything. The question stayed with Walter throughout his recovery. What if he had listened sooner? What if he had taken the symptoms seriously? What if he hadn't blamed everything on age? The truth was difficult to accept. No one could know exactly what would have happened. But the doctors explained that recognizing warning signs early often gives people a chance to receive treatment, identify risk factors, and potentially prevent a major stroke from occurring. That realization weighed heavily on him, not because he wanted sympathy, because he didn't want others to make the same mistake. Weeks passed. Slowly, life began to improve. Walter's speech became clearer. His strength gradually returned. His balance improved little by little. Each small victory felt enormous. The first time he buttoned his shirt without assistance, he smiled. The first time he walked across the therapy room without stopping, he nearly cried. The first time he played with his grandchildren again, Margaret couldn't hold back her tears. Recovery was teaching him something important. People often focus on the dramatic moment a stroke occurs. They rarely talk about everything that comes afterward: the frustration, the uncertainty, the exhaustion, the determination required to relearn things that once felt automatic. Many stroke survivors describe recovery as one of the hardest journeys of their lives. Walter understood why. Every day required effort, yet every day also brought hope. One afternoon, several months after his stroke, Walter sat in a rehabilitation support group. The room contained men and women of different ages. Each person carried a unique story, yet a surprising pattern emerged as they spoke. One woman had ignored dizziness for months, A retired teacher had dismissed temporary speech problems. Another man assumed his arm weakness was arthritis. Someone else blamed vision changes on aging eyes. Again and again, Walter heard the same explanation. "I thought it was normal aging." The phrase appeared so often that it almost sounded rehearsed. But it wasn't. It was real, and it revealed a dangerous misunderstanding. While some physical and mental changes can occur as people age, sudden or unusual symptoms should never be automatically dismissed. Aging itself should not cause sudden facial drooping. Aging should not cause one-sided weakness. Aging should not cause sudden speech difficulty. Aging should not cause abrupt vision loss. Aging should not cause sudden confusion or loss of coordination. Those symptoms deserve medical attention immediately. Walter wished someone had explained that to him years earlier. Maybe they had. Maybe he simply hadn't listened. Either way, he was listening now. One evening, his granddaughter Emily sat beside him on the porch, the same granddaughter who had noticed his smile looked different before the stroke. She was drawing pictures while Walter watched the sunset. "Grandpa?" "Yes. Are you better now?" Walter smiled. "I'm getting better." She nodded thoughtfully. "That makes me happy." Walter felt a lump form in his throat. "So, does it make me happy?" Emily continued drawing. After a few moments, she looked up. "Can strokes happen to other people too?" Walter nodded. "They can. How do people know?" The question seemed simple, yet it carried enormous importance. Walter thought carefully before answering. "They pay attention when their body tells them something isn't right." Emily considered that. Then she smiled. "That's smart." Walter laughed softly. "Yes, it is." As children often do, she had reduced a complicated lesson into something simple and powerful. Pay attention. That was exactly the message. Not fear, not panic. Awareness. Because awareness saves lives. Months later, Walter received encouraging news during a follow-up appointment. His doctors were pleased with his progress. His rehabilitation had gone remarkably well. His risk factors were being managed. His recovery continued moving in the right direction. As he left the hospital that day, he felt grateful. Not everyone recovers the way he had. Some stroke survivors face lifelong disabilities. Some lose their independence. Some never regain lost abilities. Others don't survive. Walter understood how fortunate he was, and that understanding fueled a new mission. Whenever he had the opportunity, he shared his story. At church, at family gatherings, at community events, he spoke openly about the warning signs he had ignored. The fatigue, the confusion, the speech changes, the weakness, the balance problems, the vision issues, the facial changes. Most importantly, he spoke about the danger of assuming every symptom was simply part of getting older. People listened, because many recognized themselves in his story. Some had experienced similar symptoms. Others had family members who had. Several even scheduled medical appointments after hearing him speak. That alone made sharing worthwhile. If Walter's story has taught you anything so far, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. These educational stories help spread awareness that could, one day, save someone's life. And if you've known someone affected by a stroke, share your experience in the comments. Your story may help another viewer recognize warning signs sooner. As time passed, Walter developed a deeper appreciation for ordinary moments. Morning, coffee with Margaret, phone calls with his children, watching baseball on television, walking through the neighborhood, listening to his grandchildren laugh. Moments he once considered routine now felt precious. A stroke has a way of changing perspective. It reminds people how quickly life can change, and how important it is not to take health for granted. 1 year after the stroke, Walter hosted a family barbecue. Children played in the yard. Grandchildren chased each other across the grass. The smell of food drifted through the warm afternoon air. At one point, Walter stood quietly observing everything around him. Margaret approached. "What are you thinking about?" Walter smiled. "How close I came to missing all of this." Margaret squeezed his hand. For a moment, neither spoke. Words weren't necessary. They both understood. Life had given them another chance. Not everyone receives that opportunity. That evening, After the guests had gone home, Walter sat alone on the porch. The sun slowly disappeared below the horizon. He thought about the man he had been before the stroke. A man who believed every unusual symptom could be explained away. A man who assumed aging was responsible for everything. A man who didn't realize his body was asking for help. Then he thought about the man he had become. Someone who listened. Someone who paid attention. Someone who understood the difference between normal aging and warning signs that require medical evaluation. The lesson had come at a high price, but it was a lesson worth sharing, because somewhere, at that very moment, another person might be experiencing symptoms similar to the ones he ignored. Someone might be struggling with sudden weakness. Someone might be noticing unusual confusion. Someone might be having difficulty speaking. Someone might be experiencing vision changes. Someone might be losing balance unexpectedly. And that person might be telling themselves exactly what Walter had told himself. It's just old age. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it isn't. And knowing the difference can change everything. Before we finish, remember the fast warning signs of stroke. Face drooping. Does one side of the face droop or feel numb? Ask the person to smile. Arm weakness. Is one arm weak or numb? Ask the person to raise both arms. Speech difficulty. Is speech slurred, hard to understand, or absent? Time to call emergency services. If any of these signs are present, seek emergency medical help immediately. Quick action can save brain tissue, reduce disability, and even save a life. Walter's story may be fictional, but the warning signs are very real. Every year, countless people mistake stroke symptoms for stress, fatigue, or normal aging. Some get help in time, others wait too long. The difference often comes down to awareness, and awareness starts with paying attention. So if you remember only one thing from this story, let it be this: growing older does not mean ignoring unusual symptoms. Your body deserves attention. Your health deserves respect. And when something feels wrong, seeking medical advice is always better than assuming. Walter learned that lesson the hard way. Hopefully, you won't have to. Thank you for spending this time with us. If you found this story helpful, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone you care about. You never know whose life a simple piece of information might help protect. And as Walter would tell anyone willing to listen, don't ignore what your body is trying to say. Sometimes the smallest warning signs are the ones that matter most.